So here we have the Horwin CR6 electric motorcycle made in China by Horwin, but distributed here in the UK by Artisan Electric Scooters, and they kindly lent me one for a few days to review, so here are my thoughts. But before we start, if you're new here and you want to see more electric motorcycle reviews like this and the latest motorcycle news and vlogs, then please do remember to hit subscribe. Before we get on the road though, here are the specs. The electric motor on the CR6 is good for about 10 horsepower, which is roughly equivalent to what you get on a learner bike or a 125. It does, however, have almost 300 Newton meters of torque, which are delivered right from a standstill. Obviously, it dies off as you get up through the revs, hence the 10 horsepower peak, but it does have that low down pull that you get with almost all electrics. Top speed is around 60 or 65 miles per hour, which is much better than some other electrics I've reviewed. It makes this a genuinely viable commuter for anyone coming into the city with a bit of A-road riding beforehand. That said, of course, it's still most comfortable in town at about 30 or 40 miles per hour. In terms of charging, it's possible to keep the cable in the stash in the tank, which is really quite convenient. You can then just plug it into the side of the bike and within 3.5 hours get a full charge, which is good for 90 miles or so. Other electric bikes I've borrowed, like the new NGT, had a pretty big charger to lug around, so it just isn't practical to charge at someone else's house or at work. But this is easy to do with the CR6, which is a massive bonus in my eyes. There's also enough space to store your personal belongings in there and a USB port to charge your phone. In terms of equipment, there's a 3-pot brake at the front, which is more than ample for a bike that only weighs 140 kilograms, and a single pot at the rear, which works just fine. There's no ABS, and as such the brakes are linked because of the law, so the front brake lever operates both front and rear, and the rear brake pedal just the rear brake. The forks are upside down and fairly substantial, and there's a monoshock at the rear. The seat height feels fairly tall. I don't have an exact spec, but it feels like it's around 790 or 800 millimeters, like a middleweight naked bike might be. Low seat heights on smaller bikes like this can feel a bit cramped, so I like this a lot. It's a simple bike in terms of tech. It does have keyless ignition, which allows you to lock or unlock the bike and enable the ignition, but if you're still using the steering lock, then of course you'll still need the key. Otherwise, there's an ignition button and 2 riding modes on the right hand switchgear, and on the left there's a headlight switch, indicators and a horn. The dash is also simple, showing revs, speed, riding mode, battery charge level and mileage, and to be honest, that's all you need on a simple little commuter. There are provisions for a passenger like a grab rail and decent foot pegs, but that cafe racer style seat will almost certainly be uncomfortable for anything other than short stints. It looks like it'd be easy to remove the rail and pegs with a few bolts, so personally I'd do that as I don't take a passenger often and would prefer the sleeker look. But perhaps for some folks it's a nice option to have the ability. The CR6 costs about $5,000, so it'd be relatively cheap to finance, and the other running costs on electrics are pretty low, so it'd make a decent budget get-about. There's also a $6,000 Pro model on the way, which I'm really keen to test. It has a bit more power at 15 horsepower, but also a manual 5-speed gearbox, which I think would really appeal to existing bikers who want a bit more character and engagement to their ride. So hopefully I'll get hold of one of those at some point, but for now, let's take the CR6 for a spin. Alright, so you just need to flip the side stand up and then hit this ignition button and it'll say ready when it's good to go. I'll stick it in mode 1 here. Hit the gas and you're off. No clutch, no gears, no nothing. It's in kilometers per hour. I probably should have looked at how to change that by now, but I have to do a bit of quick mental translation there. Apologies for this camera angle. I couldn't actually find anywhere to mount that, but it's better than nothing. It's a bit wonky though. I mean, what I'll do is I'll ride this out to, there's a bit of sort of 50 mile an hour dual carriageway, so I think taking it over there, because that's the difference between this bike and the new NGT or a scooter like that or some of the smaller electric bikes is, yeah, this actually has the ability to go on that kind of road as well as nipping through town traffic. The thing that jumps out about this bike immediately to me is just how little it feels. I mean, it's ideal for riding in town because the bars are narrow, the bike's narrow. When you're kind of looking ahead, it just disappears beneath you. Stick it in mode 2 here to get a bit of acceleration. It's very smooth still. That initial twist of the throttle doesn't give you a torquey like jolt. It smoothly delivers the first few miles per hour, and then yeah, ramps it up from there. But yeah, it's ideal for filtering this bike. It's so narrow. Even the pegs are super narrow. One minor complaint I do have though is that the pegs ramp up ever so slightly towards the outside, and because they're so narrow, my feet kind of end up on the little lip, and so actually I don't know how comfortable they would be for, you know, any decent amount of time, because essentially my feet are balanced just on the little pips on the end. If I had one, I think I'd probably swap the foot pegs for some flat ones. But that's not a big job really, is it? And it's probably down to personal preference a bit. Some people might like that they curve up just to keep your feet on the pegs, but because they're so narrow, there's just not quite enough space for me. All right, here we go. We're in mode 2, so there should be enough welly to cruise along with the traffic at 50 here. Oh, come on, mate. I mean, it probably lacks a bit of acceleration for doing quick overtakes or anything like that, but it's not bad at all. It can hold its own. Yeah, like as the traffic moves off, look, I've got the throttle pinned and it's pulling away from me, so you wouldn't do anything particularly adventurous with your overtaking, but if you're happy just covering a few miles in the left-hand lane here, then there's enough to go at. But yeah, I'll come off here. Easily comfortable enough and cruisable enough to do that for a bit of commuting every day. The ride is not bad as well, actually. I had a Sinis Bomber a few months ago, which is a little 125 Chinese made as well, and I did feel like the upside down forks were a little bit overkill because it made the front end heavy compared to the rest of the bike. But maybe because this has got a decent bit of mass with the battery and the motor like electric bikes do, you know, that's not lightweight equipment, it sort of balances it out a little bit, and actually it doesn't feel like that. It feels very stable, and yeah, it's quite nicely planted. I do often wonder if big upside down forks like this are a little bit too firm for small bikes, but it's not bad here. And the shock's not bad either, and it's got a bit of padding to it, the seat, so yeah, it's generally quite comfortable. And like I say, the seat height's not too low, so I don't feel too cramped up. Definitely commute on this easily. A word on the brakes. Normally I hate combined braking. There's a few examples where it works, where, you know, I had the Honda Goldwing a couple of weeks ago. On such a big heavy bike like that, it does make sense. But on the smaller bikes where they're built to a budget, and so they don't put ABS on them, and then it's a legal requirement to have both brakes operable by at least one of the levers, yeah, it just sucks. The main problem with it is that I found the rear brake locks up too easily. When you use the front, you know, brake lever on the bars, it'll put the front brake on, and if you're doing an emergency stop, as all your weight shifts forward, it takes the weight off the rear, and then that just means it slides so easily, so you don't have that ability to control either brake. My other issue with it is that a lot of learner riders will be learning to ride on these little bikes, and part of learning to ride is knowing when to use the rear brake, when to use the front, when to use a bit of both, and how much of each in order to stop safely. And it takes away the ability of doing that. In a way, like, ABS is great for that, because sometimes when you give it a bit too much rear brake, you'll hear it chatter as the ABS kicks in, and you think, okay, well, I gave it a little much there. But yeah, you just don't get that chance with combined braking. But I think the implementation on this bike is as good as it could be, because I've found that the rear actually doesn't lock up all that often. So maybe it's just the case that they've got the balance between the front and rear brake right, and, you know, that's pretty good. I think also possibly the tyres are better on this bike, which means that rear doesn't lock up. I mean, you can still do it, especially if you move forward and put the front brake on. But yeah, the brakes are good. You know, that 3-pot brake on the front is more than enough to stop a 140 kilogram bike quite quickly, and the feel is not bad either. Honestly though, I've just really enjoyed it as a little errands bike. I'm on paternity leave at the moment and just been nipping out to the shop to do little jobs occasionally, and it's absolutely cracking for that. And it just seems a bit more viable as a commuter, given that it can just get up to 60, 65 than, you know, something like the new NGT, which is truly an inner city bike, where it's limited to sort of 40 miles an hour. And honestly, sometimes in London, the traffic, even though it ought not to get up that quick, you know, sometimes the traffic does move at 35, 40, and yeah, that's the sort of max for that bike. So I just feel like a bit more headroom on this bike makes it a bit safer perhaps, and yeah, you can do those extra bits of faster road if you need to. These tyres are actually sort of like flat tracker, or, you know, a little bit like semi-knobbly. Maybe I'll find a bit of gravel. Horwin actually do make like yeah, the other model that they've got coming out is more like a motocross or like, you know, enduro style bike, so it'd be interesting to check that out at some point if I get a chance. A little bit like the Zero FX, is it, or FXS, but cheaper. I saw one the other day when this bike was being dropped off and it actually looked pretty good. Alright, it's absolutely not billed as an adventure or gravel bike, but there are little occasional trails in South London like this. Look, cobbles. Got it in mode 1. There's not much engine braking. Whoa. On a bike like this, electric, but easy. Look. Whoa. You know, back when London was a whole series of little villages, all these little lanes existed, and most of them have been swallowed up, but you can still find them. There's another one down here somewhere. Just got to be careful of delivery vans coming the other way. Woohoo! Sorry, mate. Alright, so there you go, answering the question that absolutely nobody was asking. Can it ride on gravel? Yes, it can. Thank you very much to Artisan for lending me this bike for a few days. It's been good fun zipping around on it. All in all, you know, a decent little bike. Good charging time, good range, decent top speed for a small bike like this, and yeah, I can see how it might be of use. Let me know if you've got any questions in the comments down below, and as always, if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, then hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.